I stood in the doorway of the church, watching my parents deliver a eulogy. For me. A framed photo, a closed casket, tearful speeches, all mourning a daughter who was very much alive. I'm Claire Morgan. 3 years ago, my family didn't just cut me out, they declared me dead. But today, I walked into my own memorial and revealed a secret they fought to bury. Have you ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most? Tell me. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you? The coffee pot gurgled softly as I leaned over the counter, cradling a chipped white mug in my hands. Morning light seeped through the blinds, casting faint stripes across the worn tile floor. I had just started pouring when my phone buzzed against the counter, its sudden vibration cutting through the quiet like a warning. I wiped my hands on my jeans and glanced at the screen. Mrs. Langford. The name alone pulled something loose inside me. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, not since the day she pressed a tiny music box into my palm and said, "Promise me you'll never disappear, no matter what they say." I had nodded back then, too young to understand the weight in her voice. Now, as I stood in my little apartment with its peeling paint and scent of burnt coffee, that memory wrapped around me like a shroud. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the message. People didn't just reach out after years of silence without a reason, especially not Mrs. Langford, especially not now. Outside, the city was waking up. I could hear the distant rumble of a bus and the sharp, happy cries of children playing before the heat of the day set in. The dogwoods outside my window were in full bloom, their scent creeping in through a crack in the old frame. Life moved on out there, indifferent to the hollow weight settling in my chest. The message contained a video. No words, no explanation, just a thumbnail of St. John's Church, the one my family used to drag me to every Christmas Eve. My hand shook slightly as I tapped play. The video was grainy, a little shaky, but I recognized the stone steps of the church immediately. The heavy wooden doors stood open, revealing a crowd inside dressed in black. A casket sat at the front of the sanctuary, framed by flowers and the kind of soft, somber lighting reserved for tragedy. And there beside it was my picture, a photograph taken years ago, back when I still smiled like I meant it. Now it sat propped up on an easel, surrounded by lilies, a silent announcement to the world that I was gone. I pressed the mug tighter in my hands, feeling the coffee inside grow cold. The camera panned across the familiar faces, friends, neighbors, relatives I hadn't seen in years. And at the podium, my parents, Richard and Evelyn Morgan. Standing tall, composed, not a single tear smudging my mother's perfect makeup. My father cleared his throat and began to speak. She was a troubled soul, but she was our daughter. We did everything we could. The words sliced through me, rehearsed and hollow. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye with a lacy handkerchief, the same one she used at every family event, more tradition than emotion. Their grief was a performance, as polished and detached as the pearls around her neck. I scrubbed back on the video, playing it again, hoping somehow I had misunderstood. But every time, the scene unfolded the same way. My parents eulogizing me, my community mourning me, and me standing alive in a shabby apartment with a stale cup of coffee and a gut full of ice. The guitar case in the corner of the room caught my eye, its black shell coated with a thin layer of dust. Once music had been my escape, a promise that somewhere, somehow I could build a life beyond the suffocating expectations of my family. Now it sat silent and forgotten, just another relic of a girl I used to be. I set the mug down with a shaky hand and braced myself against the counter. The birds outside chirped on, blissfully unaware. My stomach twisted, the floor feeling unsteady beneath me. There had to be some mistake, some sick misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew better. People like my parents didn't make mistakes. They made choices. And this choice, declaring me dead without a word, without a call, was deliberate. I stared at the still frame on my phone, the photo, the casket, the lies. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. What the hell were they hiding? People die every day, some by accident, some by design. As I sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of my tiny apartment, laptop balanced on my knees, those words looped through my mind like a song I couldn't turn off. The night pressed heavy against the windows, thick and humid. I had cracked them open earlier, hoping for a breeze, but all I got was the slow drip of sweat down my back and the faint hum of distant traffic. The fluorescent light above the kitchen buzzed and flickered, making the whole room feel even more claustrophobic. Stacks of old paperwork surrounded me. Bills, work contracts, pay stubs, anything that could prove I was still here, still breathing. I scrolled through government databases, my fingers cold despite the sticky air, my heart hammering against my ribs. It didn't take long. There it was, plain as day. Claire Morgan. Date of death, July 18th, 2021. Cause, road accident overseas. A tidy little lie, filed away in some dusty office, stamped and signed like it was nothing more than a clerical task. I stared at the screen, my vision swimming. It felt surreal, looking at my own death in black and white, like I was a character in someone else's tragic story. My father's voice drifted through my memory, sharp and cutting. Nothing ruins a reputation faster than a scandal. Of course, in their eyes it was better to have a daughter who had died tragically than one who had refused to toe the line. Better a memorial than messy questions. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling. I started dialing the numbers I still remembered by heart. Family, friends, distant cousins, even old neighbors. Each call went the same way. Blocked, voicemail, disconnected. It was as if I had been scrubbed from their lives, just as neatly as my death certificate suggested. A sharp ping broke the silence. I looked down. A text message from Caleb Ross, my cousin, the only one who had ever dared to sneak candy into my backpack at family reunions. Now his message blinked on the screen. Claire? Is this really you? I typed back, heart hammering. It's me. I need to know the truth. For a long moment, nothing. Just the blinking cursor. Then, they told everyone you died. Car crash overseas. No body to bring home. Memorial only. I closed my eyes, the weight of it settling over me like a blanket soaked in ice water. They hadn't just cut me out. They had buried me without a second thought. The fluorescent light buzzed louder, sputtering as if it might die too. I wanted to rip it out of the ceiling, to scream until the whole building shook. But I just sat there, the laptop warm against my legs, the truth colder than anything the summer air could throw at me. In the distance, a siren wailed, low and mournful, bleeding into the heavy night. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the rough texture of the paint scrape against my shoulders. My eyes traced the cracks running along the ceiling, fractures barely noticeable unless you were looking for them. Just like me, broken but still here, if you bothered to see. They hadn't even tried to find me. Not one call, not one question. They had simply decided it was cleaner, easier to pretend I was gone. I pulled the old music box from the shelf beside me and wound it absent-mindedly. The soft, tinny notes floated into the room, filling the silence with a melody that once meant comfort. Now it just felt hollow. I looked back at the screen, at the name printed there in bureaucratic finality. Claire Morgan. Deceased. No, I thought, my jaw tightening. Not deceased, not done, not erased. I set the music box down carefully and closed the laptop with a soft click, the sound final in the thick night air. My name wasn't just forgotten, it had been erased, and I was going to find a way to bring it back. You can't bury someone and pretend they never lived, at least not when they're still breathing. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic mug, letting the scent of cinnamon and fresh coffee seep into my skin. The cafe near Freedom Park was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a dusty bookstore, the kind of place you could slip into and disappear without anyone noticing. The walls were lined with mismatched art prints and battered shelves of secondhand novels. A birthday party buzzed in the corner, little kids wearing paper hats and chasing each other around tables. Their laughter rang out, high and carefree, a sharp contrast to the weight pressing down on my chest. Across from me, Caleb Ross stirred his coffee slowly, his eyes darting toward the door every few minutes, as if expecting someone to burst in and drag him away. I didn't blame him. Meeting me wasn't exactly a safe move. He looked older than I remembered, a little thinner, a little more careful. His hands trembled slightly when he lifted the cup to his lips. "I had to be sure it was you," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. It sounded crazy. "You being alive?" I nodded, staring at the swirling foam on top of my latte. "Yeah, well, imagine how it feels on my end." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of conversation and clinking dishes filled the space between us. Somewhere behind the counter, an espresso machine hissed and spat steam. The sweet, sticky smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the back almost made me nauseous. Finally, Caleb leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. "I need to tell you something you might not want to hear." I braced myself. "Go ahead." He hesitated, glancing around once more. Then he said it, the words dropping heavy between us. "Emily got everything after you. After they said you died, your trust fund, your shares in the family business, even the college savings account your grandparents set up for you. It was all transferred to her 6 months after the memorial." I blinked, the room tilting slightly. "All of it?" He nodded. "All of it, legally, quietly. No questions asked." My throat tightened, the familiar burn of betrayal clawing its way up from my gut. It wasn't just that they had declared me dead. They had erased me from the family's future, pocketed my life, and handed it to someone else. Someone more convenient, more controllable. Emily, the golden child, the perfect daughter they always wanted. I swallowed hard, forcing the bile back down. "Did she—" I started, then stopped. I already knew the answer. Caleb read my mind anyway. She didn't fight it. She didn't even blink. The birthday party across the cafe hit a crescendo, a chorus of tiny voices singing off-key. I watched the parents laughing, clapping, recording it all on their phones. A normal moment in a normal life, a life that used to feel possible. I pulled my phone from my bag, fingers fumbling slightly, and opened social media. I hadn't looked at Emily's profiles in years. I had avoided them, a self-inflicted wound I refused to pick at. But now I had to see. Her account was public again. The first image that popped up was a professionally shot photo of her wedding, a glittering, sunlit affair at some vineyard just outside the city. White roses, champagne towers, a diamond ring so large it practically screamed for attention. There, in the background, stood my father, smiling and holding a glass high in toast. My mother beside him, dabbing her eyes daintily with a handkerchief. Emily glowing at the center, draped in silk and pearls, her new husband's arm around her waist. Caption: "To new beginnings and family traditions." My fingers curled around the phone until my knuckles ached. New beginnings indeed, built on the grave they had dug for me. I swiped through the photos, each one a knife twisting deeper. Toasts, dances, smiles, laughter, and not one single mention of me. Not a memory, not a whisper. They hadn't just moved on. They had celebrated my absence. Caleb watched me silently, his expression caught somewhere between pity and helplessness. I placed the phone face down on the table and looked out the window, where the late afternoon sun had started to slip behind the trees, casting long, slanted shadows across the sidewalk. "They thought they'd buried me," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "They forgot the dead don't stay silent." The words hung in the air, heavier than the humid summer heat. Outside, a breeze stirred the dogwoods, shaking loose a few white petals that drifted across the glass like tiny, silent ghosts. I wasn't a ghost, not yet, and I was done being quiet. They thought my story had ended. I was just about to start a new chapter. I wiped my palms on my jeans before pushing open the glass door to Adam Blake's office. A bell overhead jingled, announcing my arrival with an old-fashioned chime that seemed too cheerful for what I carried inside. The room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, the kind of scent that tried too hard to cover up years of dust and lost causes. Adam Blake looked younger than I expected, early 30s maybe. His brown hair flopped into his eyes when he stood to greet me, knocking over a precarious stack of file folders in the process. He scrambled to catch them, his cheeks flushing pink. "Claire Morgan?" he asked, pushing his glasses up his nose. I nodded, clutching the folder tight against my chest like it might disappear if I let go. The old air conditioner rattled in the window, barely keeping the sticky summer heat at bay. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the heavy air, a constant hum that filled the spaces between our words. We sat across from each other at a battered oak desk. Adam cleared a spot among the clutter and offered me a seat with a hopeful smile, the kind you gave someone walking into a minefield. I placed the folder down carefully and opened it. Passport stamps, employment contracts, apartment leases, tax returns, photos with timestamps, evidence of a life lived quietly, stubbornly, defiantly. Adam sifted through the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. The only sound was the slow creak of his office chair and the steady, relentless thrum of the cicadas outside. Finally, he looked up. This is incredible," he said, voice low. "You have more documentation than most living clients." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's the problem, isn't it? I am a living client." He nodded slowly, tapping the papers into a neat stack. "Okay, first step, we file a motion to revoke the death certificate. We'll argue that it was fraudulently obtained based on falsified information. Then, we pursue a civil case for damages, if you're up for it." "I'm up for it," I said without hesitation. Adam hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You should know, it's going to be messy, emotionally, legally. People will question everything, and your family, they won't go quietly." I leaned back in the rickety chair, feeling the familiar hollow ache bloom in my chest. They've already buried me once. What more can they do? He smiled grimly. "Good point." Adam began gathering copies, scribbling notes, muttering court terms under his breath. I watched him, the knot in my stomach loosening slightly for the first time in days. It wasn't hope exactly. Hope was too delicate, too breakable. This was something tougher, something forged from anger and exhaustion and the stubborn refusal to stay buried. As he typed into his ancient desktop, a notification pinged on his phone. He glanced at it and frowned. "You're not going to believe this," he said. I leaned forward. "What?" He turned the screen toward me. A public announcement from St. John's Church, a memorial service scheduled for this Sunday, in honor of Claire Morgan. I stared at the screen, the words swimming in front of me. "They're holding another memorial?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Adam nodded. "Looks like it. Probably a final send-off." I sat very still, the cicadas' buzz outside growing louder, more insistent. All at once I saw it, the opportunity, the stage, the moment they would least expect. A slow smile spread across my face, one I didn't quite recognize as my own. "This Sunday," I said softly, "they'll gather to mourn me." Again. Adam hesitated. Claire confronting them like that. He shook his head. "It won't be easy, not just legally, emotionally. You'll be walking into a room full of people who already buried you once." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not planning to walk in as their daughter." He frowned, not understanding. "I'm planning to walk in as their ghost," I said, "and this time I'll be the one delivering the eulogy." The old air conditioner shuddered in the window, rattling against the frame as if the whole room could feel the weight of what was coming. Adam said nothing more. He just nodded, slowly, resolutely, and went back to typing, the clack of the keyboard sounding like distant thunder before a storm. Mourning me was easy. Facing me would be harder. I stood across the street from St. John's Church, hidden behind a line of parked cars, watching the slow, somber gathering of black-clad figures. The afternoon was thick and heavy, the kind of humid summer day that pressed against your skin and soaked through your clothes. Overhead, the sky sagged low and gray, as if it, too, was mourning something it didn't quite understand. The church looked exactly as I remembered it. Sturdy brick walls, whitewashed steps, heavy wooden doors. As a little girl, I used to race up those steps in my best holiday dress, laughing as my mother called after me to slow down, to behave. Now I stayed rooted to the pavement, the memory curling in my chest like smoke. From where I stood, I could see the crowd filtering through the open doors, heads bowed, whispers trailing behind them. Neighbors, old classmates, distant relatives I barely recognized anymore. They all wore expressions of polite sorrow, carrying casseroles and condolence cards, like offerings to a grief they thought was real. Inside, the organ began to play, a low, solemn tune that wrapped around the building and spilled into the street. I tugged my black coat tighter around me and crossed at the light, each step deliberate, rehearsed. The scent hit me before I even reached the doors. Wax candles, fresh-cut lilies, and beneath it all, the faint metallic tang of the air conditioning, fighting a losing battle against the heat. I paused just outside, my hand resting lightly on the old brass handle. Through the crack in the door, I could hear my father's voice, steady and sonorous, filling the sanctuary. "She was a troubled soul," he said, "but we loved her with all our hearts." Lies, polished, practiced lies. I pushed the door open slowly. The hinges groaned in protest, a long, aching creak that sliced through the soft murmur of the service. Every head in the room turned toward the sound. Some expressions flickered with confusion, some with shock, a few with something closer to fear. I stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind me with a final, echoing thud. Before I left, he handed me a copy of the final decree, embossed and official. It felt strangely heavy in my hand, like holding the deed to a second chance. As I stepped out into the bright sunshine, the humidity wrapped around me like a thick blanket. But it didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt real, tangible, alive. The news had already begun to ripple through town. Fraud investigations were underway against my parents and Emily. Some of the old family friends sent half-hearted texts and emails, stumbling over words like misunderstanding and tragic confusion. Most stayed silent. That was fine. I wasn't looking for apologies. I was looking for freedom. Later that evening, in my new apartment overlooking Freedom Park, I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by boxes I hadn't yet unpacked. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, a mattress on the floor, a chipped kitchen table, a single worn couch. But the wide windows let in the sunset, bathing everything in soft gold. I pulled the old music box from my bag, tracing its faded edges with my fingers. Mrs. Langford's voice echoed gently in my mind. "Don't let them write your ending." I wound the tiny key and listened as the familiar tinny notes filled the room, shaky but unwavering. The melody stumbled a little, but it kept going. Like me. I reached for the battered guitar case leaning against the wall. Dust floated in the late sunlight as I opened it, revealing the old six-string that had traveled with me through better days and worse. My fingers found the strings, tentative at first, plucking out a clumsy chord. The sound filled the apartment, rough, imperfect, but real. It vibrated against the bare walls, settled into the corners, claimed the space as mine. I played another chord, then another, the notes blending into something messy and beautiful. I didn't just come back, I rose. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from anything. I was simply here, breathing, living, beginning again. Sitting by the window of my new apartment, with the soft strumming of my old guitar filling the room, I realized that sometimes survival is its own quiet victory. We can't control the stories others try to write for us, but we can always choose to keep living our own truth. In this life, forgiveness may not always be possible, but standing up for ourselves with grace and courage is its own kind of healing. When families falter, it's often kindness from unexpected places and the stubborn belief in our own worth that carries us through. If this story touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your journey too. Every voice matters.